Hey, welcome to another episode of Late TV Fights. We've got a great one here for you today. We've got Cameron Holzmann versus Joe Farelly. But before we introduce the competitors, going to introduce the judges. I've got the spaceman, Alan Shepherd here. Alan, how's it going?
Hello, everyone, and going pretty good. Happy to be here. Happy to hear these competitors duke it out.
And also here, I've got my buddy Matt Kearns. Matt, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling so great because I was always meant to be a judge on this match. And so it's great. And you're always meant to be a judge. And it's not like 5 minutes before when I was laying in bed watching Smallville. I was asked by Malcolm to come and debate this, which is why I'm wearing a baseball cap and a sweatshirt. So yeah, it's a late night debate.
I mean, it's one of those ones when someone disappears. You got to get someone in quickly.
Okay.
But anyway, we're going to introduce our competitors. First up, he's the higher ranked. We've got Cameron Holzmann. Cameron, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm very tired. I definitely am not as prepared for this fight as I was for mine against you. I think this is going to be a lot more interesting just based on the picks, because I think we've both made some very interesting decisions on a lot of these. But in the end, it doesn't matter what your picks are. It matters how well you can argue them, and I'm ready to argue my ass off. So, yeah.
And introducing second is Joe Farelly. Joe, how's it going?
Hey, I'm Malcolm. How you doing? You all right?
I'm fine.
Yeah, but do this. I've had one so far. Got a little taste of victory for it. So let's go and see if we can get another one.
But with that said, we have introduced competitors. We've met the judges. Going to drop the judges off screen. And now, how the rounds goes, there's 4 prepared questions with an opening of 90 seconds, the middle of 5 minutes, and the closing of 1 minute. Each competitor has a 1-minute extension that they can use on the opening or closing should they need it. Cameron's the higher ranked, so he's going to go first on this first question, which is, who is the best TV family? You got 90 seconds on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
Okay, so when it comes to talking about the best TV family, you have to think about a family that works together, that complements each other, that builds each other up, and works constantly to make each other better people and to ensure that they stay great. And family is not just defined by the people that you are born of and the people that you that are your parents and are your siblings. Sometimes you find a family, sometimes families combine. And so I picked the Hudson Hummels from Glee. The Hudson Hummels, of course, being the family that is created when Bert Hummel marries Carol Hudson, bring the two of them together, and also bring together their sons, Kurt and Finn. You've got an amazing set of 4 people in this family. You've got father Bert, who, in my opinion, is the greatest TV dad in a fight that will never air because it didn't happen. He is caring. He loves his son, but he also works to make sure that Finn knows what it's like to have a father, because Finn never had that in his life. You've got Carol, a mom who is willing to do whatever it takes to protect her children, but is also not afraid to tell them and expose them to the hardships of life and the hard truths that they have to go through. You have Finn, who, when the series starts, is like a jerk and he is mean to Kurt and he hates him. But throughout time, they grow and Finn ends up becoming one of Kurt's biggest defenders. Is willing to fight, is willing to be embarrassed, and is willing to do whatever it takes to protect him. You have Kurt, who's an amazing son who protects his father throughout all the hardships, who helps his mother to plan her wedding and make sure that things go well between them, and sets up this family and works to help.
And time. All right, Joe, you got 90 seconds on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
Now, in 1990, Will Smith's life got turned upside down, and he got sent to live with his aunt and uncle in Bel Air. That's why I've picked the Banks/Smith family. from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, because over the next 6 years and 148 episodes, we came to know the best family on the TV screen. You know, the chemistry between this family was palpable, not just on the screen, but off the screen as well. You know, this was a group of people that not only gelled as a family on screen, they were a family off screen. And that is why the Banks and the Smiths are the best TV family. We'll go more into it once we get into the round. But for me, it is always going to be the Banks / Will Smith from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
5 minutes is on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
The thing is, Cameron, when it comes to the Banks family, this is a chemistry and a dynamic that is still relevant 23 years after the show finished ending. So many different family moments, so many different dramas. When it comes to the Hudson Hummels, you know, they're not even the only family of focus of Glee. You've got the Andersons, you've got the Sylvesters, but with the Fresh Prince, it was all about the Banks. Every single episode was focused on them and their family dynamic and the difficulties they had to go through. It's really easy sometimes for a show, especially when it's focused on the youth, to portray the parents as out of touch. But even from that very first episode, when Will calls Phil out for being out of touch, you know, Phil straight away back on him, talking about bigotry and seeing Malcolm X speak. From the first episode, this told you that this was a family that was going to change things, going to challenge your view on family, and was really going to set the benchmark for TV families.
Okay, first things first, you mentioned several other families in Glee. The Andersons, we meet Blaine's mom once for about 30 seconds, and we meet his brother for a single episode. His brother shouldn't be a dick. The Sylvesters, that's a different thing. The Banks family, the thing is, while yes, you have this chemistry at points, there's so much negative energy in there all the time. Phil is a very, very greedy man, despite all the money that he has. He pays Jeffrey, who should be considered a member of their family, he pays him the smallest amount of money possible while simultaneously spoiling Hillary with as much money as she could possibly imagine. And yes, I know that he does eventually give Jeffrey a raise. That's only when Jeffrey finally leaves and stands up for himself. So Phil doesn't really realize that until the consequences are shown. As well, Phil is a vindictive, malicious, and sadistic man when it comes to discipline. He threatens Will with like just a threat that sits idly by for 3 seasons until it pays off. And it's just like, it's cruel. He's way overprotective of Ashley and refuses to let her live her own life, which in turn makes her rebellious, which makes their family dynamic thrown off again. It makes him blame Will for all of those things. Vivian is just willing to support pretty much whatever the children want, especially after the actress change. Even if it's not in their best interest, like letting Hillary pose for Playboy or letting her marry Trevor on a whim, even though Trevor is an idiot who gets himself killed bungee jumping while proposing. Like, it doesn't work. But the Hudson Hummels, they come together as a unit. They build each other up. Finn and Kurt, like, start off as enemies. The first time we see Finn and Kurt together, Finn is literally throwing Kurt into a dumpster. At the end of that first season, before they even have officially become brothers, Finn states that no matter what happens, no matter what it costs him, he has got Kurt's back and he will be there to protect him no matter what, no matter the humiliation. He dresses up like Lady Gaga to stop Kurt from being bullied by Karofsky, and that's saying something.
We're talking about the best family here. Look, the Hudson Hummels are a good family. They are. But, you know, Glee ended 4 years ago, and no one really talks about Glee that much anymore. 23 years since the Fresh Prince was on there, and it's still relevant. There's still clips being shown all over social media today. The big one, of course, being the "How come he doesn't want me" man scene, which even the director broke down for that because of the chemistry between James Avery and Will Smith. You've got other moments. You've got the fact that, you know, Carlton, when he took the uppers, and Will eventually, you know, takes the blame for it. It's like that emotional moment. You know, you've got, you know, Phil when he has the heart attack. You've got, and it's not just the dynamic between Will and Carlton or Phil and Will. You've got the sisters. You've got Ashley and Hillary. You know, Hillary actually teaching Ashley, giving her the sex talk. You know, the moment where Will gets shot, and you know what it does to Carlton on the inside. And even the strong moments from Vivian with her husband Phil, you know, it's like, "Oh, you're going to vacuum in that?" And she drops like, "No, I'm going to go dance." And what does she do? She goes and dances, because that is it's a strong family unit, and you feel that not only from the first episode but all the way through. Maybe when the dust settles, in a few years, people will be talking about Glee, but it's been 4 years, and the Hudson Hummels are not even in the conversation. You could name the Griffins, the Smiths, the Bradys. All these families have got a better family dynamic and a better resonance within the public consciousness about what a family is.
But see, the question isn't most iconic. The question isn't most popular. The question is best, and it's the best family. The Banks have a ton of issues. Like you said, Will becomes extremely uncomfortable and overprotective and takes on the most toxic traits of Phil when Ashley needs his help and when she needs his advice, especially when it comes to the sex talk. You're talking about Hillary and Ashley's relationship. Hillary is a bad influence. She's incredibly spoiled. She constantly lies to the rest of her family, no matter how dire the consequences. She lies about the fact that she dropped out of college. She constantly makes decisions that she knows will make her family unhappy, but she doesn't care about the consequences because daddy's money can just buy her out of everything. Will has the most flexible morals when it comes to making choices of all time. He literally blackmails Hillary. He openly mocks and verbally attacks Carlton for being on a regular basis.
Joe's going to go first on the closings. And I'll just leave you all here. Joe, you got 1 minute on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
The Hudson Hummels may be the best family in Glee, but there are, like I said, there are other families in that show, and when your show doesn't have that focus, it loses its impact. Whereas the Banks are the focus of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. We're still talking about it today. That show is still relevant today. It still has that impact today. Whereas even though it's only been off the air for 4 years, Glee doesn't have that impact, and more importantly, the Hudson Hummels do not have that impact.
All right, Cameron, 1 minute is on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
Again, you keep talking about them being iconic and being important, but that doesn't mean that they're the best. Just because something is well known does not mean that it is great. The Hudson Hummels come together as a family unit. They build each other up, despite the fact that they come from two very broken families. Carol finds Bert and brings him in and gives Finn this chance to finally have this father that he never had. Carol truly loves him and it's amazing. Carol also is the most caring mom. When Finn finds out that his girlfriend is pregnant, but it ends up not being his baby, she is fully understanding and nurturing to him, never yelling at him, never judging him, and giving him the comfort and support that he needs, and even letting her live in their house. Kurt cares for his father after he has a heart attack and makes sure that their family unit stays together. Bert and Carol cancel their honeymoon so that Kurt can go to a school that protects them. The Banks family is full of disconnect. It's full of a bunch of terrible, narcissistic, bad people who, sure, at points that they work together and become better, but they still have so many negative influences. Like the main things will.
There was definitely some great arguments there. I'm going to go to Matt first. Matt, who do you think should get the point and why?
I knew you were going to go to me first because that was a really great fight. And this always, Malcolm has this ability to do this to where it's like he just can read my mind. It's a really interesting fight because it's one of these fights that comes down to sort of the wording of the question and how the competitors look at that. Joe really kind of fought for the iconic nature of the Banks and how we're still talking about 23 years later, and how Glee 4 years later, we're not really talking about, we're particularly not talking about the family there. Whereas Cameron kind of talked about how that, I'm sorry, that's just my own fault for not going Glee characters, but how that family sort of, they came together as a unit, they built each other up, they tried to sort of bring out the best of each other. I think really tough. I think I'm going to just have to give the point to Joe. I think he was able to combat about how there were times, despite the bad, that the Bankses would come together as a good family unit, and that even if it wasn't the original question, the fact of we're still talking about the Bankses today, and how even when you talk about Glee, we're not talking about that family specifically. So Joe gets the point for me.
I'm actually going to go the opposite way on this, because and it's one of those ones like Joe did a good job of arguing it. Even though they were both going it from two different angles, I think Cameron got a lot of stuff in about the family, and how it brought up the problems of the Banks family in the show. So that's why my vote's going to go to Cameron. So, Alan, I'm sorry to do this to you, but you're the tiebreaker.
No worries, no worries. I said I wanted to judge, and this is part of it. The hard choices, hard choices. Both arguments were really good. I really appreciated Cameron's use of what is a family, and a family is what we create for ourselves sometimes. And I love his example and the choice that he used. But when talking about the best, he actually argued some of Joe's points a little bit more than Joe by showing the warts and the bad aspects, the negative aspects of that family. Because a family is yours, and a family, warts and all. And I think Joe hit it when he said the focus of that show was that family, warts and all, and the relatability of them. There were some hardships that the family in Glee went through, but that wasn't the main focus of Glee. Now, if Cameron would have chosen the actual club as a family, you see that family dynamic throughout the whole of the series. But with the Banks, you're focused on that one family, and I think I'm going to give it to Joe for that.
The Seavers
Joe
was
gets
the choice, though. Just saying.
so Joe gets the first point on this. We move on to the next question, and because Cameron went first on that one, Joe's going to go first on this one. And the question is, what is the best comedy of the 2010s? And as I said, the show must have at least started in the 2010s. But so 90 seconds is on the clock. Joe, start talk when you're ready, and you are muted. Yeah.
The show I picked has become a cultural phenomenon. In just the 4 short years it's been on, well, 6 if you count one episode, the show has taken over the world. That is why I have chosen to get swifty with Rick and Morty. And I shall go into why as we hit the round.
Cameron, 90 seconds is on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
Okay, so when it comes to talking about the best comedy of the 2010s, we have to talk about a show that's not just funny, but that is also important and that does something that other shows aren't doing. And that is why I picked the 2015 to 2019 musical comedy show, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, for those who are not aware, is a show about a woman named Rebecca who, on a whim, moves to follow her ex-boyfriend, who she's still in love with, and ends up in this world full of these really interesting and really great characters that sort of show her who she truly is and that she doesn't need this man to define her. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend goes to places that a lot of TV shows, especially comedies nowadays, don't do. It has a very, very strong focus on mental illness, and that focus has been praised by psychologists and critics who have watched the show and felt that it was accurate. It also is notable for having a lot of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender representation. The show actually worked together with GLAAD, which is an organization that works to create LGBT importance in media, and worked to create accurate and diverse characters that weren't just stereotypes and they were super important. It also has great music. It has incredibly funny jokes. It's created by a female writing team, ran for 4 seasons. The network kept believing in it despite its low ratings, just because it was so good, and they kept believing that it would find the audience that it deserves, because it's truly an amazing show. It's truly one of the most important shows of all times. It touches on femininity and a woman.
All right. But we've got 2 really completely different shows here to have. But 5 minutes is on the clock. Time begins when someone starts talking.
Okay, first things first. Rick and Morty has one of, if not the most toxic fan community of any show in history. And I know that's not specifically on the quality of the show, but the show has created something that is harmful to society. Of course, we have the well-documented Szechuan sauce incident, which was a public fiasco that just didn't go well, and it's on the fault of the thing. Fans are publicly immoral, disrespectful, and downright crazy. As well, the show is offensive in many points. Within the first season, there's a scene where Morty almost gets raped in a bathroom, but they play it off for comedy because, oh, look, it's a jelly bean that's doing it. The show relies not so much on like actual comedy and well-written jokes, and instead just awkward situations where characters are doing funny and ridiculous voices and glorifying alcoholism, and that's not okay.
The thing is, we said it in the last round about the difference between iconic and best. But to be iconic, you have to be doing something right, and you have to be doing it special. And that's what Rick and Morty does. You know, the thing is, you only have to look on IMDb. IMDb is a 9.3 overall. Its lowest rated episode is 7.7. Do you know what else is 7.7? The whole of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Your show is as highly rated as the lowest rated episode of Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is a cultural phenomenon, as I've said. It's heartfelt, it satirizes, it carries a message, does all the right things that comedies do. You say that the critics have praised Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Well, it depends what critics you're actually listening to, because some have actually said that it, and I agree with them actually, when you look at the mental health and the stuff that actually portrays in there, it only takes the most cliched tropes of the mental health illnesses that it's trying to portray. You know, it's funny that how, you know, when all is going well with Josh or Greg, everything's fine with her. Mental health's not much of an issue. You know, her medication issue only really comes up when it's relevant to the plot. The thing is, it is a great premise, and I do agree with you, it's a great premise, but it fails to stick to its guns and it fails to stick to the landing. You know, the show has been praised for being upfront about these things, but again, it hits those cliched tropes and it doesn't actually add anything new or relevant to the conversation.
See, but I disagree. It's the first show in television history to focus on a character who has borderline personality disorder, a disease and a mental illness that is not talked about enough. And it focuses on the idea that you are not alone and you don't have to go through this because you can have that support system. Sure, they don't focus on it all the time, but the idea behind that is that it's not a thing that necessarily is present all the time, but sometimes it gets really bad, and that's when you need help, and that's when you need the people around you. The musical numbers in the show are incredible, from We Tap That Ass, which is a fantastic comedic song with a great dance number, to amazing parodies of other things, such as when they do the Math of Love Triangles, which is a great parody of classic Marilyn Monroe numbers. So you saying that your show can satirize stuff, mine can also do the same thing. The difference is that Rick and Morty like actively avoids talking about serious issues and instead just puts its characters on dumb, pointless adventures that only teach us about how much they don't want to take responsibility for the bad things they've done. Pickle Rick is an entire episode where a character turns himself into a pickle because he doesn't want to deal with the issues going on, and then at no point do we see him dealing with the issues. We just see it turn into a dumb action adventure. Rick and Morty are the only two characters that really have any dimension to them. Summer is so one-dimensional that her main character trait is that she says all the time that she's going to piss herself to the point where it seems like one of the writers is probably into it. But it just doesn't work. It glorifies neglect. It's either focusing on Rick's sadness or how funny his alcoholism is, which it's not a funny thing. It doesn't work. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has emotional, like heartfelt moments. It has fantastic comedy and great characters. It's worlds above. Sure, IMDb has it rated lower. IMDb is in no way the end-all, be-all of what makes a show great and what makes a show important.
I'm not saying that it's the be-all and end-all. I'm just pointing out the statistics to you. The fact is, you've got to look at it from the other point of view. When you watch TV comedy, it's a comedy. I'm there to laugh, and I have laughed more watching Rick and Morty than I will ever watching Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Like I said, it has a great premise, but it fails to stick to its guns and it fails to stick that landing. It focuses on the issues. It hits those cliche tropes, and it treats it as much more that it just treats it far too simple than the real life issue actually is. If you're gonna tackle these issues, you need to hit them where they need to be hit, and not just to be treated as another part of the show. If that's where it wants to focus, that's where it needs to focus. Rick and Morty is really, really funny, and that is the essence of a comedy.
See, but the thing is, its comedy comes from, it's not smart comedy. It's comedy where it just says a bunch of random stuff and hopes that you don't understand it, and then when they combine that with a funny voice,
and time
elevates it.
Time for the closings. 1 minute is on the clock. I think Cameron went first on the opening, so Joe go first on the closing.
I went first on this one.
Cameron goes first on the closing. 1 minute starts when you start talking.
Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is not just one of the funniest, not just one of the most well-written, but one of the most important comedies that we will get, not just in the 2010s, but in our lifetime. It's created by an all-female writing team run by females, and it tackles female issues that other shows are not willing to do. It's so open about female sexuality and women's issues in an age where a lot of shows are too afraid and not willing to deal with that. And they don't talk about it in a judgmental way, and they don't necessarily like just play it for the idea of playing it for a laugh, but they talk about it in a way that's real, that happens to be funny. And that's what makes it so good and makes it so real. Sure, you can say that it's cliche, but it's a romance that works, and it's a character who realizes that not everything in her life is about men, and that she has to focus on herself before she can focus on these things. It defies the standard tropes of the romantic comedy television show and makes it its own thing. It also has a consistent through line that works throughout the entire 4 seasons. Rick and Morty is a bunch of random episodes with no real through line. The only through line we've really gotten recently is the fact that Rick divorces Morty's parents and feels no remorse about it because, hey, we've got a guy who does terrible things.
And Joe, 1 minute is on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
Rick and Morty has just started its 4th season and it's still going strong. The fact of the matter is, it does satirize and it does carry sometimes a heartfelt message. You just have to look a little bit deeper. When Jerry and Beth actually realised that actually all along that they should have been together during the interdimensional cable episode. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, it ticks all the right boxes on the surface, but once you actually dig deep into it, it just treats it. They're all just a surface issue. Some of the mental health issues, the issues with the medication, they're thrown away when they're not relevant to the plot. And you talk about the feminist issue. As soon as she is having a good relationship with 2 men, everything's fine with her. That doesn't scream to me that it's tackling the feminist issues head on. Rick and Morty carries that message. It's heartfelt, and to top it all off, it is really, really funny. And also, it is a lot harder to do comedy on improv, and so much of the comedy is improvised. And that, in an animated show, is brilliant. And that is why it's already surpassing Family Guy as one, and American Dad as one of the funniest adult animated shows on television at the moment.
Time. That was another really tough battle, but Alan, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
Yeah, all right. Well, kudos to the contestants for picking 2 completely different ideas, topics within the topic, 2 different audiences, different demographics, different everything. So kudos to you guys for doing that. Both shows I've only seen 1 episode of. I saw an episode of The Crazy Ex-Girlfriend because a friend of mine was in that episode, and Rick and Morty I saw because I'd heard nothing but Rick and Morty for a long time and decided to watch an episode. Both, to be fair, made me laugh. I didn't see a lot of the issues that they were both talking about within each episode, so I thought it was very interesting, coming from a perspective of people who know that show, why they love that show so much. So I really appreciated that. But at the end of the day, bottom line, if this was, what was the most woke show, then I would give it to Cameron. But it was what was the best comedy. And I've heard more of consistency with being a strict comedy, even within the arguments here, that Rick and Morty was a better comedy, because trying to do what good comedy does, satirizes and goes for the hard jokes when they have to. So I'm gonna give it to Joe.
Matt, I'm going to go to you next. Who are you going to give your point to and why?
Well, I actually have never seen an episode of either one of these shows. So I had no, this is my favorite comedy. I had none of that shit. I've seen, promotional material for this, and that's all. So it was completely on debates, which, again, fuck you guys for being so good at debating, because this makes our job a lot harder. I think had the question been, what was the best show of the 2010s? I think Cameron had Lockdown. But the question was, what is the best comedy? I heard a lot of great things about Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and talking about mental health and all this, but I didn't hear anything about the comedy, really. I heard Cameron say, it satirizes a couple of songs, but Joe was just able to throw out more of what the comedy hits, how it hits. He was also able to attack when Cameron talked about all this good stuff about mental health, he was really able to attack the fact that it's kind of surface level. And so because of those things, I have to give my point to Joe, despite Cameron giving a really good fight.
Right. Now into the next question. This is a must need for Cameron to win. The question is, what is the best TV crossover? So, Cameron, you've got 9 seconds on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
I want to use my extent. No, not right now, actually. No, I'll save it. I'll save it for probably then. All right. So with a crossover, what you want to do is you want to bring together 2 or more shows and make it so the 3 of them complement each other, that they work together, and that they create a story that is satisfying for the viewers of any of the shows, even if they haven't seen all of them. You want to make sure that the audience is entertained the whole time, and you want to make sure that there is nothing to turn the audience away from it that would alienate them in any way. And that is why I have picked Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana. Now, listen, I am aware that the moment I say that, it sounds ridiculous, but it is a really, really good crossover. It takes 3 of the biggest shows in Disney Channel history, Wizards of Waverly Place, Sweet Life on Deck, and Hannah Montana, and it brings them together in a 3-part episode that works on so many levels, where you have all these interesting character dynamics, where these characters who would, under normal circumstances, never meet, get the chance to see each other, and it's well explained, it's well justified. They set up the fact that this is going to be happening in previous episodes, so it fits within the story of all of them, and it doesn't just come out of nowhere and blindside everyone. It also fits in the continuity of previous episodes of the series, such as when Sweet Life of Zach and Cody already crossed over with Hannah Montana, and it acknowledges that that had happened, and it even makes it an integral plot point of the thing. It works together to take all 3 shows, bring all 3 audiences together, and they can all understand what's going on, even if they've only seen one of the shows. And that's what you want of a crossover. You want it to have the chance to bring your audience into these other things without taking away.
All right, Joe, you got 9 seconds on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
When we're talking about a best TV crossover, we need to focus on what that is. And when you're using one show that's crossing over with others, you still need to focus on the main points of that show. And that's why I have picked the season 4 2-part finale of Doctor Who, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, which crossed over with the 2 spin-offs, Torchwood and the Sarah Jane Adventures. Why? Because it tells the story. It's still about Doctor Who. It still follows on the full story arc of season 4, but it crosses over the other 2 shows brilliantly. You're never lost, because these 2 shows originally spun off from Doctor Who in the first place. It's just bringing them back, but they had their own shows, and it had the side characters from those coming in, and everybody gets a moment. The story works. That's why it's the best crossover.
All right, 5 minutes is on the clock. Time begins when someone starts talking.
Okay, getting started right off the gate. Joe said it. It's just bringing in characters who are already from Doctor Who and putting them back in the show. It doesn't feel like a crossover. It fully ignores the continuity and the series arcs of both of the shows at where they were at. Immediately after Journey's End, the day later, Torchwood goes, and it takes absolutely no care of what has happened in Doctor Who. It doesn't acknowledge that those events have ever happened, and it just goes off and does its own thing. As well, you have Sarah Jane Adventures, which is a children's show, and you have Torchwood, which is a highly adult show, and you cross them over together via Doctor Who. Sure, Doctor Who is the middle ground show, but when you say that you're bringing together these 2 polar opposite things, you immediately alienate part of the audience of both of those shows, and that's not what you want a crossover to do. You don't want it to push away parts of your audience because you're bringing the things together. You want it to bring the audiences of those things together and have them bond over the thing. The crossover doesn't care about these shows that aren't Doctor Who. It's only about Doctor Who. It doesn't care that the other shows aren't Doctor Who. It's just making them what they used to be. They'd all shown up only a season earlier, so it doesn't feel like a crossover. You're just bringing people back, whereas you have 3 shows that have connected maybe once or never connected, and you're bringing them together, and you're telling good stories that fit within all of them, and you're justifying them. and it feels like this big event to the point where it got 9.3 million viewers on the night it premiered, which is the most of that, which is the most views of any program that night or that week. And as well, that's with it being a children's series on a premium channel like the Disney Channel, whereas Journey's End and Stolen Earth got less views than that. And that was with it being a season finale and what seemed to everyone like it was going to be the final hurrah of the 10th Doctor, which it ended up not being, which left a lot of people unsatisfied. And they weren't able to make the final hurrah of the 10th Doctor because they just decided not to and threw away an original ending that was then disappointingly added into later episodes and led to a bunch of spin-off episodes that served truly no purpose. They didn't continue the Doctor's story. They just put him in these situations where he had no companion. He was alone. And a lot of people didn't even watch them and then were confused and missed the regeneration of the Doctor.
You know, it's quite easy to write fanfic in your own head where Star Trek meets Star Wars and Game of Thrones meets Lord of the Rings. And that's what Disney Channel did here. They say, hey, you like these three shows? We're just going to throw them all together.
Yeah, they crossed them over.
But with Doctor Who...
That's what the question's about.
Doctor Who was spun off from the start. And you say that they didn't care about continuity, but they did. There's aspects of the Sarah Jane show that's never been mentioned in Doctor Who. That was brought in. You've got events from the Torchwood Season 2 finale, which are specifically mentioned in The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. The fact of the matter is, it's a Doctor Who episode that's crossed over, so you have to keep that focus, despite the fact that it's not just about the crossover. It's about telling the story, and it still tells that story. It ties up all the unresolved questions from season 4, hits all those lots, and do you know what? It ends with one hell of a gutter punch. I won't spoil it for anyone here, but on an emotional level, it hits hard. But do you know what? With us on deck, it's fine, it's great, it's McDonald's, it's Burger King, it's lots of fun, it passes the time, but it isn't great, and it hardly fills you up. But when you watch Stolen Earth and Journey's End, you leave fully satisfied.
Okay, but you're trying to fault a children's show for being what it is and for being made for children and being made to satisfy its audience. Stolen Earth Journey's End fully breaks the rules of Doctor Who with his regenerations, having him waste a generation. You have a clone Doctor, which feels more like anything out of a fan fiction than just 3 shows that have connections through the channel crossing over by just having a second Doctor. So we get twice the hot David Tennant because he's our man. Yay. The special effects are cartoonish and cheap in the Stolen Earth. The Earth being towed and the way that people shake around and all that looks awful. Like, the ending literally seems like the writers wrote themselves into a corner and just had to make Donna a Time Lord. Another thing that comes out of fan fiction. And then, honestly, yeah, I'll spoil the ending for you. It gets rid of Donna. Donna, a companion who lots of people that were watching the show were sick of Donna. They found her annoying. They found her insufferable. And then it takes away all the consequence of Donna's time with the Doctor by wiping her memory and not making her able to be like sad about what happened. She doesn't know what's happened. It doesn't work. It just doesn't fit. The Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana, as much as acknowledges the continuity of each of the shows, it sets up for it previously, it puts all of them in the middle of an arc, and it sets shows off in ways they need to go. Wizards on Deck is actually the first time that Bailey and Cody have their romance is shown as being two-sided and not just being a one-sided infatuation from Cody. Is Malcolm calling time? He's muted.
I was Yvette calling time.
I saw you move, and I'm like, I think that's time, but he's muted.
But anyway, go to the 1 minute closings. Joe, you go first on the closings. Time begins when you start talking.
You talk about leaving an audience unsatisfied. Season 4 is still one of the highest rated series in Doctor Who since the reboot. That finale alone, again, I have to go with the ratings. It's 9.1 out of 10, whereas Wizards on Deck, 6.4. But we won't go too much into that. At the end of the day, you say it ignores the continuity, you says it breaks the rules. No, it doesn't. It just creates new rules that hadn't yet been visited. You say that, they just had to get rid of it, get wiped their memories. This is a show that's been going for 50 years. It's gone through numerous companions, and the fact that it keeps finding new ways and better and different ways to actually get to for the companions to leave shows that they're still creative and to cross over. And the fact of the matter is, it's still about the crossover. All of the characters that cross over get a story up, get a line, get multiple lines, and have something to do rather than just, oh, look, this person's meeting this person, or this person's meeting this person. Great.
Right, so Cameron, 1 minute is on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
Okay, first things first, you said that not all of the characters have storylines in it. Max has his storylines with Zach and Cody where they're being friends and being buds. Alex crosses over with Bailey and they have a good time together. Justin meets London, they have a good time together. Hannah and Cody have their reuniting after being together in Sweet Life on Deck. So, like, all the characters do have something to do and they do have something to cross over with. The show actually also has some really good emotional moments that are really surprising. There's a conversation with Miley and her father about, like, pain over losing a treasured item of her mother's, and they talk about the fact that that item is not the spirit of her mother and that the spirit of her mother lives on. Yes, just because this episode doesn't have necessarily the plot significance to the series that yours does, doesn't mean that it's not as good. And in terms of being a crossover, where you take 3 different things and you bring them together and you make it work and you acknowledge all of them, it works a lot better. It acknowledges the continuity. You didn't give a single example of how the continuity is acknowledged from Sarah Jane and Torchwood. I looked it up. There's maybe a throwaway line that doesn't work. And it doesn't alienate its audience. It takes 3 shows that have the same
time. There's another different, really great debate here. But, I'm going to go first on this. I think Cameron had this in the bag because he brought up a lot of good points about Wizards on Deck on Waverly Place with Hannah Montana. I always mess up that title, but yeah, and he managed to knock down Joe's for not technically being a crossover and all that, and he not nailed down what the crossover was, just random episodes that don't necessarily have to continue this through line, but can if they want. So Cameron's getting my point in this one, but Matt, who are you going to give your point to and why?
So actually, funnily enough, compared to the last one where I knew absolutely nothing about this, I know both of these things very well. I am a new Doctor Who fan, but I've watched a lot of the series, so I'm catching up with that. And I was one of those, 91 million viewers of Sweet Life on Deck with Hannah Montana. I remember that crossing over. I think that Joe gave a lot of good fights for Doctor Who and for sort of the crossing over and how it sort of was taking these 2 series that were spun out from Doctor Who and bringing them back, and he did sort of fights and the continuity things, and also how the fanfic stuff that Cameron was talking about was actually just new stuff that they were creating, which the show was always doing. However, I think when it came down to the question of the best crossover, I think Cameron had a better argument for what his crossover did was a lot harder because you were taking 3 separate things and putting them together, and it's still a continuity. It still had relevance to the series moving on. Like, I love the fact that he brought up Cody and Bailey's first date being in this, and that becomes a big point for Sweet Life on Deck. So Cameron was back to 2 corner on this one, and he definitely fought back. So yeah, good work.
Anyway, we move on to the final question of the main round, and if Joe hits this, he wins. If Cameron gets it, we go to speed round. Because we started with Cameron on the last one, Joe goes first on this one. I'm going to put 90 seconds on the clock, and time begins when you start talking.
Geez, Malcolm, you picked a hell of a question for the final round of this, and it is what you could look on Google, you could look anywhere, and you could look up lists of best episodes of The Simpsons, and you would come up with 100 different answers. But for me, I have picked the episode from the second episode of season 8. You only move twice. Homer and the family move away from Springfield, and then he goes to work for basically a James Bond supervillain. It's a great episode. Every single member of the family has their own story arc. It's a great episode. It's got great throwaway gags, and every single second of this episode still works today.
Cameron, 9 seconds is on the clock. What is the best Simpsons episode? Go when you start talking.
All right. So when it comes to talking about The Simpsons, the main thing to know is that it's a bunch of one-off episodes that rarely have a through line. And so when determining the best, you want the episode that kind of on its own stands the best and that works on its own more than anything else. Well, yes, there's a few multi-episode arcs. For the most part, it's a lot of one-offs. It's a lot of things that don't connect to each other. I think if you're looking for a one-off episode that works on its own, you can go in with no prior knowledge of The Simpsons and enjoy it and like it, is Homer the Great. Homer the Great, of course, follows Homer as he learns of the existence and joins a secret society known as the Stonecutters, who control not only Springfield, but apparently control the entire world. It has a great slow build of tension where Homer starts noticing these things that are very weird and don't add up, and gradually starts to figure it out and go on his own. And like, it keeps the mystery, and then it pays it off really, really well within the single episode. It creates an original secret world, an original secret society that has a very expansive lore, and it all manages to explain it and keep the story going in the matter of 22 to 23 minutes. Like, that's really, really impressive. Patrick Stewart is also in there and gives an amazing voice performance as number one. Like, you can't even really recognize him, but just the tone of his voice is almost Alan Rickman-esque, and just like has this cadence to it that is very slow.
Time. Right, 5 minutes is on the clock. Time begins when someone starts talking.
The thing about a Simpsons episode is it always has to have, the thing about Simpsons is it does so many things brilliantly. It satirizes, it skewers things, it uses other medium, it takes the mick out of other medium, and that's what this episode does well. But more importantly, it gives every single character a story arc. The Homer the Great's a great episode. I'm not even going to deny that, but the problem with it is it only focuses on Homer and his story with the Stonecutters. In You Only Move Twice, Homer gets his story working for the James Bond supervillain. It's a great skewering of the James Bond franchise. Even has a little James Bond cameo in there. You've got Bart struggling with the educational system at his school, being put in the remedial class to, as he says, catch up with the others despite the fact they're going slower. A great satirization of the education system. Lisa has her storyline where she's allergic to everything. You've got Marge's storyline where she is struggling to actually find something to do because the house is doing everything for her. Not only that, the other thing that makes The Simpsons is its side characters. And almost every side character gets a line. It's a small line, but you get to see them all, and you get to see the characters you love. That's why it's the best.
Yeah, that's right. Every side character does get a line, and that line is the same with every character. It's goodbye. And they spend a minute to a minute and a half of this episode where you don't have a lot of time just showing a bunch of random characters who have nothing to do with this current storyline, saying the word goodbye, and it's wasting its time. Yes, it has 4 different stories for each of the characters, but none of those stories gets enough development and enough time to go. Yes, Homer the Great focuses just on Homer and not on the rest of the Simpsons family, but that doesn't mean it's a worse episode. It takes this story and fully develops it, instead of having a bunch of smaller side stories and underdeveloping all of them. Also, You Only Move Twice, it's filled with animation errors where the number of kids in Bart's class from frame to frame fluctuates wildly. The backgrounds when Lisa is walking through the forest changes the number of trees and all of that. There's no consistency. Homer the Great keeps it simple. It has a really, really great color palette with the animation of these deep reds and these cool purples to it. It has an amazing song in We Do, which is a fantastic original song that also satirizes the culture of secret societies. It satirizes the idea of there's all these mysteries that we don't understand, and it builds this world and it expands their influence without it feeling cheap or expository and too easy. As well, it does a thing that we've seen since then, but we hadn't really seen up to that point, which is a storyline where we have a chosen one, and the chosen one kind of gets sick and fed up of the idea of being the chosen one. Homer is so excited at first to be this holy religious leader to these men, and he realizes that being in power keeps him so alone, and then realizing at the end with the emotional moment that when Homer realizes that family is the only thing he needs to truly feel at home and to truly feel like he belongs, is a fantastic emotional ending. You Only Move Twice is an episode where they move and has the potential to get this good emotion, and they just don't use it and instead pay it off with a cheap character named Hank Scorpio who's supposed to be funny and ends up being annoying. And it doesn't feel like a satire of Bond villains. It feels like just a ripoff of Bond villains that's thrown off into the side to create a 5th side story that is again underdeveloped. We don't get backstory to the man. We don't get who he is, other than just he's lying to you all the time and he's crazy, and that's all it is. It doesn't have a sense of focus. It should try and focus on one story and make that story great instead of trying to tell 5 stories of 5 different people.
You talked about what your episode did in 23 minutes. It told one story. This tells 4 stories and it tells it well. The issue is the show is not called Homer Simpson. It's called The Simpsons. And this is why this is the best episode of The Simpsons, because it highlights all of the main characters of the family and it tells the great story. The thing is,
see, but the question isn't what is the best episode about The Simpsons. It's what's the best episode of the show called The Simpsons, and you're trying to re-quantify the question, and that's not what you get to do.
Well, here's the thing. It's You Only Move Twice is still the better episode. The thing is, every single thing in that episode still holds up. Even the small sight gags, the small throwaway gags, the fact that all the children in the remedial class look and sound like Ralph, the small little joke where Homer goes to ask Hank Scorpio for sugar and he pulls loose sugar out of his pockets, and then he follows up with, "Do you want any cream?" And just Homer's simple reaction of, "No." And the fact is, even yours has jokes that don't hold up. Who makes Steve Guttenberg a star? That's not going to work today. Kids today are going to watch Simpsons and go, "Well, who the hell's Steve Guttenberg?" It's not going to work. We all know him from Police Academy, but that's because we know who he is. We play and we work in the movie circles. The fact is, every single thing in You Only Move Twice still holds up today.
Time.
4 great stories that focus on the family.
Right. Now we're down to the closings. Cameron, you go first on the closings. 1 minute is on the clock. Time begins.
I will use my extension, good sir.
2 minutes is on the clock. Time begins when you start talking.
All right, You Only Move Twice has a concept that could be great where you have them leaving the home that they've been living in for these 8 seasons that we've been following them. But instead of using it to create something meaningful and create something great, it starts abruptly with just all of a sudden out of nowhere, "Oh, we're moving, great." And then has no emotional payoff, just is filled with a bunch of stupid jokes, is filled with a bunch of people saying the word goodbye. The couch gag in it is just unoriginal, where it's them falling onto the couch, whereas Homer the Great has a great couch gag where it's like the MC painting, and it's really visually interesting and really, really cool. In terms of jokes, sure, the one Steve Guttenberg joke doesn't land, but there's a bunch of jokes that are just random things Hank Scorpio is saying that go by so fast that they don't land because they don't give you enough time to sit with it, when he just keeps rambling on and going to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. The character development is virtually non-existent. You keep saying it has all of these different stories instead of one, but I'd rather have one good story than 5 mediocre ones. Homer the Great makes great jokes about like small little things. And again, Homer the Great, sure, it has jokes, like they make a joke about the Black Panther Party that could be a little edgy, but they definitely walk the line to make it really, really funny. It has emotion. It creates ideas that go on and get used in far more popular media. You Only Move Twice tries to build a conflict within them for leaving Springfield, but also the entire time that they're trying to make them conflicted, they're just talking about how terrible Springfield is. And then, like, "Oh, Lisa is allergic to some things. Oh no." Like, it just has so much potential and throws it all away, and then technically it's poorly made. It could be far better in a technical standpoint. It could be far better from a writing standpoint. It could be far better from a voice acting standpoint. Number one has a very memorable voice. I couldn't even really tell you who voices Hank Scorpio, and just it's self-contained. It builds its own thing in Homer the Great, and it builds itself up and lets it be its own thing. I'm assuming Malcolm's calling time.
Yep.
I appreciate the fact that the poster behind Malcolm is just constantly giving him bunny ears.
All right. Joe, you got 1 minute on the clock. Time will begin when you start talking.
Homer the Great is a good episode, but it's not a great episode like You Only Move Twice. You even talked about the ending and how it hits that emotional punch. The only reason Homer finds the value of family in the end is because the Stonecutters start a new club that just bans him, called the No Homers. You know, and that's the thing. Whereas, and you say who voices Hank Scorpio, it's Albert Brooks, one of the most used Simpsons guest stars, one of the most famous voices out there. Homer the Great is fine, but it's not You Only Move Twice. It's called The Simpsons. It's about The Simpsons, and this episode is about The Simpsons. It's about their family dynamic, and it's about them trying to stick together to try and support Homer's new job, but Homer eventually realizing that he has to do what is right for his family and move back to Springfield because it's what they need and it's what they want and it's what works for them.
There was another great fight, and I'm going to start with Alan first on this one. Alan, who are you going to give you point to and why?
Both good arguments, because if I've seen every episode of The Simpsons, so, and my number 1 and number 2 were both represented right here.
Oh, wow.
And Cameron, I got to tell you, I got love for you. I gave you the last point, but no one says an unkind word about Hank Scorpio. One of the greatest characters ever created. I have 12 papaya trees in my yard right now because they're filled with papaya. The hands down the best episode. And you made some good arguments, Cameron. But I don't watch The Simpsons for great storytelling and moving, emotional aspects of it. I watch it because it's funny. They make really biting social commentary a lot of the times, and it's just a good time. And Joe, I'm with you, brother. You picked my favorite. It's on you. Point to you, brother.
All right, Matt, who are you going to give your point to and why?
This is really tough because there's another great fight, and this sometimes happens with questions that are, what is the best of X series? Because you can fight it like Joe fought it as being the best episode of The Simpsons, whereas Cameron was kind of fighting as it's the best because even if you don't watch The Simpsons, you could still watch this episode. And that was just like the minute from their openings, I was like, God damn. They both made really strong points. Cameron with those digs about animation, I was like, all right, we're going this far. But I think at the end of the day, for the question being what is the best episode of The Simpsons, I think Joe, just for me, I just heard more about sort of it's The Simpsons, sort of talking about the storylines of the family and all that coming together and how, this stuff about family that Cameron was talking about, it wasn't really that emotional because it sort of only happened because Homer got pushed out of a clique. Whereas with You Only Move Twice, that there was that actual genuine emotion of Homer deciding to go back to Springfield for the betterment of his family. So I have to give it to Joe. I'm sorry, Cameron, you gave a really good fight.
Yeah, with that, Joe does get the point, and the Kevin, unfortunately, you just couldn't pull it off today. But how do you feel about how it all went down?
Well, I had never seen The Simpsons before yesterday, so that's part of it. I have only seen 2 episodes of The Simpsons. It's the 2 episodes we fought. So the reason I argued it the way I did is because that's really the only way I could argue it because I don't know the show. Joe did a great job. I think that there were some things being said that were not really being acknowledged at points, and like talking about satire, and then I talk about it, and that would be kind of ignored at points. But like Joe, a hell of a fight. I'm not going to be bitter. I'm not going to be mad. I'll be back. If I can win Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana, I can
win. Well said. Well said.
That's a mic drop right there, Cameron.
That is.
As we move over to Joe, Joe,
I'm wondering why I didn't pick an Arrowverse one. I've never seen Arrowverse.
Yeah, I mean, I gathered that was the case. It was just sort of me just being disappointed no one did it. But Joe, how do you feel about your win today?
Oh, I've not sat on my backside for an hour and a quarter and felt so exhausted. And it's not just because it's 3 a.m. That was a hell of a fight. I think each round you could have put down to a 49-51 vote on how strong both arguments were. Cameron's a hell of a fighter, and he really put up a hell of a fight. And especially that last round, I was preparing for the speed round, if I'm honest. I think I may have just nailed it on the closing when I remembered about the No Homers Club at the end.
but yeah. So with that brings us to the end. Alan, how do you think the match went tonight?
These are two grade A top fighters right here. Cameron, the thing that's beautiful about you, man, is you have such passion with your arguments. It might have been only the 2 episodes of The Simpsons you've seen, but you saw those episodes. You researched them, watched them, took vigorous notes, and you could tell. Well, you could tell that everything you were arguing, you always come with such passion and from the heart, which is always beautiful to see. And Joe, same way. Both passionate about what's going on. I think it was a 49-50 for most of these arguments. So good job. And if you can win with Hannah Montana, bruh, you'll be winning in the future.
And Matt, your last minute judge here, but how do you feel about the match?
That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana was the superior of those crossovers. No, that's just my old assness about that stuff. I think as someone who's debated a lot before, I've debated in this league, sometimes when the person you're fighting is so good, that forces you to up your game, which then forces your other competitor, and that's exactly what we saw here. Joe and Cameron both just sort of like right off in that first question. It never felt like either one of these rounds was a blowout for me. So both of you have very bright futures in this league. Cameron, you did great. This happens. I was in this stuff before when I played Cody, to where like sometimes it's just gonna go your way. Joe, good work. I don't even know what else to say. Smallville's calling me, so somebody save me.
But yeah, both Matt and Alan said it. This was a great fight. We've had 2 back-to-back weeks where both the matches have been amazing. Because last week's match of Ryan Payne versus Joe Harrison was just great. But yeah, until we see you again, don't change the channel. And yeah, I don't really have a sign off with this. But I'm just going to end.